The Alpha King's lost heir rejected the entire palace, until he ran into my arms calling me Mama. Welcome, everyone. Before today's unforgettable story begins, we have one small request. If you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with love, hope, and powerful emotional journeys, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. It only takes a moment. It is completely free, and your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories like this one. We truly appreciate every one of you. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. We always enjoy seeing how these stories connect people from different countries and communities across the globe. Now, settle in, and let us begin today's story. The lost heir of the Alpha King did not fear the entire palace until he found the one person who made him feel safe enough to call her Mama. For 5 long years, the royal family of Blackwood Kingdom searched for their missing heir, a child whose disappearance left an empty place beside the throne and a silence that no celebration could ever fill. When young Oliver Blackwood was finally returned to the palace gates, the entire kingdom gathered to welcome him home. Nobles prepared grand ceremonies. Servants decorated the halls with flowers. The Alpha King himself stood waiting, hoping that the son he had spent years longing for would finally run into his arms. But the moment Oliver entered the palace, everyone realized something was different. The little boy who had returned was not the joyful child they remembered from old portraits. He was quiet, distant, and guarded. He avoided every kind smile, every gentle invitation, and every attempt from the royal family to make him feel at home. The palace offered him the finest rooms, the best meals, and endless attention, but none of it reached the lonely heart of the young heir. Adrian Blackwood, the White Alpha King, watched his son from a distance with a pain he never allowed anyone to see. To the world, he was a powerful ruler who carried the responsibility of an entire kingdom. But behind the crown was a father who only wanted to hear his child laugh again. Every healer, counselor, and royal caretaker had tried to help Oliver, yet the boy remained trapped behind an invisible wall of fear and sadness. Then, one quiet afternoon, a young white Omega healer named Naomi Sinclair arrived at the palace. She was not invited because of her status or family name. She came because she had a gift for healing hearts that others often overlooked. Naomi never believed that broken things needed to be forced back into place. She believed they needed patience, understanding, and someone willing to sit beside them until they were ready to open again. When she first entered the palace garden, she noticed Oliver sitting alone beneath an old tree. Everyone else had tried to convince him to return inside, but Naomi simply sat a comfortable distance away and began caring for the flowers around her. She did not ask him questions. She did not demand his trust. She simply shared the quiet moment with him. Slowly, Oliver looked up. For the first time in months, his eyes showed curiosity instead of fear. Naomi smiled gently and continued watering the small garden beside her. "Some flowers need more time before they bloom," she said softly. "That does not mean they are broken." The words were simple, but something inside the little heir changed. The next morning, the entire palace witnessed something no one expected. Oliver walked past every royal attendant, ignored every noble greeting, and moved straight toward Naomi. Everyone froze as the young heir reached out his arms and held on to her dress with quiet certainty. Then, with a voice filled with emotion that the palace had not heard in years, he whispered one word. "Mama." The grand hall fell completely silent. Adrian Blackwood stared at the scene before him, unable to understand how the woman who had just arrived had reached the heart of the child he had spent years trying to save. And Naomi, overwhelmed by the moment, realized that this was not the beginning of a simple healing journey. It was the beginning of a family being rewritten by kindness, trust, and a love no one had expected. The entire palace struggled to understand what had happened that afternoon. For years, young Oliver Blackwood had refused every hand offered to him, yet a healer he had never met somehow became the first person he willingly reached toward. The word he spoke continued echoing through every hallway, leaving servants, nobles, and advisors wondering how a single moment could change everything they thought they knew about the lost heir. Naomi Sinclair, however, did not see herself as someone who had performed a miracle. She simply saw a child who needed someone to listen. The following morning, She returned to the palace garden expecting Oliver might avoid her like everyone else. Instead, she found him waiting beneath the same old tree where they had first met. He did not run toward her this time. He simply looked up and offered a small, uncertain smile. Naomi sat beside him and placed a small flower beside the garden path. "Do you know why flowers are special?" she asked gently. Oliver shook his head. "Because they grow differently," she explained. "Some bloom quickly, some need more time, but every one of them has something beautiful waiting inside." Oliver carefully touched the flower petals, studying them with quiet curiosity. It was a small action, but Adrian Blackwood noticed it from the castle balcony above. The Alpha King had watched countless experts attempt to reach his son, and none had succeeded. Yet Naomi never tried to force Oliver to change. She simply gave him space to become comfortable. That difference stayed in Adrian's mind. Later that day, Adrian requested a private conversation with Naomi inside the royal library. The room was filled with ancient books, warm candlelight, and the quiet atmosphere of a place where history had been preserved for generations. "I owe you my gratitude," Adrian said. Naomi gently shook her head. "Your son does not need gratitude. He needs consistency." Her answer surprised him. Most people who entered the palace tried to impress the king. Naomi spoke to him as a father first and a ruler second. "Oliver has lost more than a home," she continued. "He lost the feeling that he belongs somewhere. A child cannot be healed by giving him everything except the one thing he truly needs." Adrian looked toward the library window, watching Oliver sitting peacefully in the garden below. For the first time in years, he saw his son looking like a child again instead of a symbol of the throne. "What do you think he needs?" Adrian asked quietly. Naomi paused before answering. "Someone who stays." Those words touched a place in Adrian he rarely allowed anyone to see. He had protected his kingdom for years, but he wondered if he had forgotten how to protect the heart of his own family. As days passed, Naomi became a familiar presence throughout the palace. She read stories with Oliver before bedtime, walked with him through the gardens, and encouraged him to express feelings he had kept hidden for too long. She never replaced the mother he had lost. Instead, she helped him remember that love could still exist after loss. The palace slowly began changing around them. Servants noticed Oliver speaking more often. He began asking questions, laughing softly, and exploring rooms he had once avoided. Even the royal halls that once felt cold seemed warmer whenever his small footsteps passed through them. Adrian watched every change carefully, feeling a mixture of gratitude and confusion. He had invited a healer to help his son recover, but he had not expected her kindness to awaken something inside himself as well. One evening, as Naomi and Oliver walked through the garden beneath the setting sun, Adrian saw his son reach for her hand without hesitation. The sight was simple, yet it carried a meaning far greater than words. His son was not just accepting help. He was choosing someone he trusted. And for the first time since Oliver returned home, Adrian allowed himself to believe that his family might not be lost forever. The peaceful changes within Blackwood Palace did not go unnoticed. While many servants and citizens welcomed the warmth returning to their home, some members of the royal council watched the transformation with uncertainty. For generations, the palace had followed strict traditions about the Alpha bloodline, royal alliances, and the future of the kingdom. To them, the sudden bond between the lost heir and a healer with no noble background created questions they were not prepared to answer. Naomi Sinclair never sought attention or influence. She continued her days exactly as before, focusing on Oliver's happiness rather than the opinions surrounding her. She helped him learn new words, encouraged his curiosity, and reminded him that being an heir did not mean he had to hide his feelings. Oliver was still a young child carrying memories too heavy for his age, and Naomi understood that healing required patience, not pressure. One morning, a formal council gathering was held inside the grand hall. Adrian sat upon the throne while Naomi stood quietly beside Oliver, who held her hand with complete trust. The oldest advisors respectfully expressed their concerns. They did not accuse Naomi directly, but they questioned whether someone like her could truly understand the responsibilities of the royal family. Adrian listened without interruption. He knew the same questions had existed silently since Naomi first arrived. Before he could respond, Oliver stepped forward. Everyone in the hall looked surprised because the young heir rarely spoke in front of large groups. "She helped me when nobody could reach me," Oliver said softly. She did not ask me to become someone else. She helped me remember who I was. The room became completely silent. Naomi looked down at him with gentle emotion, realizing that the little boy who once refused every connection was now brave enough to defend someone he loved. Adrian felt a quiet pride unlike anything he had experienced as a ruler. His son was not speaking because someone told him to. He was speaking because kindness had given him the confidence to use his own voice. After the gathering ended, Adrian found Naomi walking through the garden with Oliver. "You never tried to make him forget the past," Adrian said. Naomi looked toward the flowers blooming along the pathway. A person's memories are part of who they are. Healing does not mean erasing what happened. It means learning that the heart can continue growing afterward. Adrian remained silent for a moment, allowing her words to settle. He had spent years believing his responsibility was to protect Oliver from every possible sadness. Naomi had shown him something different. A child did not need a perfect world. A child needed people who would remain beside him when the world felt uncertain. That evening, Adrian returned to his study and opened old records from the years before Oliver disappeared. Among the forgotten documents, he discovered a letter written by Oliver's mother shortly before her passing. The letter contained a message intended for the future of her son. It spoke about a healer who would one day enter their lives, someone with a rare ability to bring peace to a wounded heart. Adrian read the words several times, unable to ignore the connection between the letter and Naomi's arrival. The next morning, he shared the discovery with Naomi. She listened carefully, but did not immediately accept the idea of destiny deciding everything. "Perhaps fate brought me here," she said softly. "But what matters is what we choose to do with that chance." Adrian looked at her with new understanding. She was not someone who wanted a crown or a place beside power. She was someone who reminded powerful people that love was built through choices, not promises written long ago. And as Oliver laughed in the garden nearby, both of them realized that the missing piece of the royal family had never been found through bloodline alone. It had been found through compassion, trust, and the simple courage to open their hearts again. Over the following weeks, the peaceful atmosphere that Naomi Sinclair had nurtured around Oliver continued to spread through Blackwood Palace, but not everyone welcomed the change. A small group of influential nobles quietly questioned whether the young heir was becoming too attached to someone who held no royal title. They spoke politely in public, yet behind closed doors they worried that the future of the kingdom might one day be shaped more by compassion than by long-standing traditions. Naomi remained unaware of many of those conversations because her attention never wandered far from Oliver. Every day she encouraged him to discover something new about the world beyond the palace walls. They visited the royal library, where Oliver became fascinated by colorful maps and stories of brave leaders who earned respect through wisdom instead of fear. They planted herbs in a small garden beside the old oak tree, and Naomi explained that the strongest roots grew quietly beneath the surface long before anyone noticed the leaves above. Oliver listened carefully, always asking thoughtful questions that reflected the confidence slowly returning to his heart. Adrian watched those moments with growing admiration. One afternoon, he invited Naomi and Oliver to accompany him on a visit to a nearby village where the royal family greeted local families each season. In previous years, Oliver had always hidden behind his father whenever strangers approached, but this time something remarkable happened. A little girl accidentally dropped a basket of apples across the town square. Before any guard could react, Oliver hurried over and began gathering the scattered fruit. Naomi smiled warmly as she watched him kneel beside the girl, reassuring her that everything would be all right. Adrian realized his son had not learned kindness from royal lessons or formal etiquette. He had learned it by watching Naomi treat every person with equal dignity, regardless of their position. As the villagers welcomed the royal family, an elderly woman approached Naomi with grateful eyes. "You are the healer everyone has been talking about," she said gently. Naomi shook her head with a humble smile. "I only remind people that healing begins when someone feels seen." Adrian heard those words and understood why Oliver trusted her so completely. She never tried to become the center of anyone's story. She simply helped others rediscover their own strength. On the journey back to the palace, Oliver rested comfortably beside his father inside the royal carriage. After a long silence, he looked up at Adrian and quietly asked, "Do you think Mama Naomi will always stay with us?" Adrian felt his heart pause for a brief moment. He noticed that Oliver no longer spoke the word with confusion or desperation. He spoke it with peaceful certainty. Adrian answered honestly, "I cannot promise what tomorrow brings, but I know she cares about you very deeply." Oliver smiled softly before looking out the window at the passing fields. "Then I will make sure she always knows she belongs with us." Those innocent words stayed with Adrian long after the conversation ended. That evening he stood alone on the palace balcony, watching Naomi laugh gently as Oliver proudly showed her the tiny herbs they had planted together. The fading sunlight painted the gardens with warm shades of gold, and Adrian realized the palace itself felt different now. It no longer echoed with the loneliness that had haunted every hallway since losing his son. Instead, it carried the quiet comfort of shared meals, patient conversations, and small moments of genuine happiness. In that peaceful silence, Adrian finally understood that a kingdom could be protected by strong walls and loyal guards, but a family could only be protected by trust, kindness, and the courage to let love grow one gentle moment at a time. The days that followed brought a new sense of harmony to Blackwood Palace, but Adrian Blackwood knew that peace was not something to be taken for granted. A kingdom could appear calm on the outside while carrying hidden worries beneath the surface, and the Alpha King had spent enough years carrying responsibility to recognize when something needed his attention. Yet this time, the challenge before him was not solved through authority or command. It required understanding. The council had grown quieter about Naomi Sinclair, but their uncertainty remained. They wondered whether the connection between the White Omega healer and the young heir was simply temporary or whether it represented a deeper change within the royal family. Adrian did not blame them for questioning what they did not understand. For generations, the kingdom had measured importance through bloodlines, titles, and ancient expectations. Naomi represented something different. She reminded everyone that a person's value could not be measured by where they came from, but by the kindness they offered when no one demanded it. One afternoon, Adrian invited Naomi to walk with him through the royal gardens while Oliver attended a lesson with his tutors. The quiet path beneath the flowering trees gave them a rare moment away from the attention of the palace. "When you first arrived," Adrian said softly, "I thought you would help my son heal. I never expected you to change the way I viewed everything around me." Naomi looked at the garden ahead, where sunlight moved gently through the leaves. "People do not change because someone tells them they should," she replied. "They change when they finally feel safe enough to become who they were always meant to be." Adrian considered her words carefully. He had spent years believing strength meant carrying every burden alone. Naomi had shown him another kind of strength, one built on patience, trust, and the willingness to accept help. Before he could answer, Oliver came running toward them with a small book held tightly in his hands. His face was brighter than Adrian had seen in years. "Mama Naomi, look what I found," he said proudly. The simple words still carried a quiet power. Months ago, the palace had been shocked by that name. Now, everyone understood it was not about replacing anyone from Oliver's past. It was about the feeling of safety he had discovered in the present. Naomi knelt beside him and listened carefully as he explained the story he had found. Adrian watched them together and felt a warmth he had almost forgotten existed. That evening, a formal celebration was held in the Kingdom Square to honor the return of the lost heir. Citizens gathered beneath glowing lanterns, sharing stories and welcoming Oliver home. In previous years, such events had been filled with ceremony and distance. This time, Oliver walked freely among the people, holding Naomi's hand while Adrian greeted families with genuine happiness. The citizens noticed the difference immediately. The Alpha King was still powerful, but he no longer seemed unreachable. The young heir was still royal, but he no longer seemed hidden behind sadness. And the healer who arrived without a title had become a symbol of compassion throughout the kingdom. As the celebration continued, Oliver looked toward his father and Naomi. "Can we stay like this forever?" he asked. Adrian smiled and placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "We will always work to protect what we have built together." Later that night, under a sky filled with stars, Adrian stood beside Naomi near the ancient oak tree. The palace lights shimmered in the distance, reflecting a home that had slowly been restored. "I used to think losing my son was the greatest sorrow I would ever know," Adrian said quietly. But now I understand that finding him again was only the beginning. The greatest gift was learning how to open my heart after believing it was closed forever. Naomi smiled softly. She knew healing was never a single moment. It was a collection of choices made every day. And as Oliver's laughter echoed from the palace halls, Adrian and Naomi both understood that their family was no longer being rebuilt from what was lost. It was being created from everything they had learned to cherish. The bond between Adrian Blackwood, Naomi Sinclair, and Oliver continued growing stronger with every passing day. But even the happiest moments could not erase the questions that remained hidden within their hearts. For Oliver, finding a place where he belonged was a miracle he never expected. For Adrian, watching his son smile again was a blessing he had almost stopped believing was possible. And for Naomi, becoming part of their lives brought a joy she cherished deeply. Yet she sometimes wondered whether she truly belonged inside the walls of a royal palace. She had spent her entire life helping others, never expecting anything in return. Now, for the first time, she was surrounded by people who wanted her to stay. One quiet evening, Naomi walked through the palace gardens alone, reflecting on everything that had changed since the day she first arrived. She remembered Oliver sitting beneath the old tree with a heart full of fear. She remembered Adrian standing behind his crown, carrying the weight of a kingdom while hiding his own loneliness. She smiled softly, knowing that healing had never been about fixing something broken. It had always been about creating a safe place where something new could grow. Adrian found her near the fountain and approached slowly. Unlike the powerful ruler who stood before crowds, this was simply a man searching for honest words. "You always seem to understand what others need before they even say it," he said. Naomi looked at him with gentle curiosity. Sometimes people reveal their hearts through the things they do not say. Adrian lowered his gaze, knowing she had noticed the walls he had built around himself. For many years, I believed being an alpha meant never needing anyone. I thought showing uncertainty would make me weaker. Naomi smiled kindly. Strength is not the absence of needing others. Sometimes strength is trusting someone enough to let them stand beside you. Her words stayed with him long after their conversation ended. The following morning, Adrian made an unexpected decision. Instead of holding another formal royal gathering, he invited families from across the kingdom to share a simple celebration in the palace gardens. There were no barriers between nobles and villagers, no separation between those with titles and those without them. Everyone gathered together, sharing food, stories, and laughter beneath the ancient oak tree. Oliver spent the afternoon showing children the small garden he created with Naomi. He proudly explained every herb and flower, repeating the lessons she had taught him about patience and care. Adrian watched from a distance, feeling a quiet pride. His son was no longer simply preparing to inherit a throne. He was learning how to become a leader who understood people. As the evening light covered the gardens, one of the elder advisors approached Adrian. "The kingdom has changed," the elder said. "Not because of a new law or a powerful decree, but because people have remembered what it feels like to care for one another." Adrian looked toward Naomi and Oliver, who were laughing together beneath the tree. "The greatest changes are often the quietest ones," he replied. Later that night, Oliver found Adrian in the royal study and climbed onto the chair beside him. "Father," he asked softly, "will Naomi always be part of our family?" Adrian looked at his son and realized the answer had never been about tradition, titles, or expectations. It was about the love they had chosen to build. "If she wishes to stay," Adrian said gently, "there will always be a place for her here." Oliver smiled with peaceful certainty. The next day, Naomi discovered a small note left beside her favorite garden flowers. It was written in Oliver's careful handwriting. "Thank you for finding me when I was lost." Naomi held the note close, feeling the weight of those simple words. She had entered the palace as a healer, hoping to help one lonely child. She never imagined that, along the way, she would help an entire family discover what home truly meant. As autumn slowly painted the forests surrounding Blackwood Palace with shades of gold and crimson, the royal family discovered that true healing was no longer something they hoped for. It had quietly become part of their everyday lives. Oliver Blackwood greeted each morning with excitement instead of hesitation, often racing through the palace corridors to find Naomi Sinclair before beginning his lessons. The fear that once filled his eyes had been replaced by curiosity, confidence, and a joyful sense of belonging. Even the palace staff noticed how different the young heir had become. He thanked servants by name, helped younger children visiting the palace gardens, and carried himself with the quiet kindness Naomi had encouraged every day. Adrian Blackwood often watched these moments in thoughtful silence. He had spent years preparing his son to become a wise alpha king, believing the greatest lessons would come from military strategy, diplomacy, and leadership. Instead, the most important lesson had arrived through compassion. Oliver was learning that people followed those who made them feel respected, not those who demanded obedience. One afternoon, Adrian invited Naomi to accompany him to the highest terrace overlooking the kingdom. Rolling fields stretched toward distant mountains, villages rested peacefully beneath the afternoon sun, and the palace gardens below were filled with children laughing together. "This is the future I always wanted for my kingdom," Adrian said quietly. "I simply never understood how to build it." Naomi looked across the peaceful landscape before answering. "Strong kingdoms are not built only with powerful rulers. They are built when ordinary people believe they matter." Adrian smiled gently. Her words carried the same quiet wisdom that had transformed his home. After a long moment of comfortable silence, he turned to face her completely. "When you first came here, I believed I was asking you to save my son," he admitted. "Now I understand that you helped save all of us." Naomi lowered her eyes with humility. "I only stayed beside people who needed someone to remain." Adrian slowly shook his head. "You chose my son before you ever had a reason to choose me. You expected nothing in return. You never sought influence, recognition, or reward. You simply gave him the safety to become himself again. That is why I admire you. That is why I trust you. And that is why I hope you will choose to remain with us, not because destiny demands it, but because your heart wishes to." Naomi felt emotion fill her eyes. She had never imagined that the lonely healer who arrived carrying only quiet hope would one day hear such honest words from the Alpha King himself. Before she could answer, small footsteps hurried across the terrace. Oliver reached them with an excited smile, looking from Adrian to Naomi with hopeful eyes. "Are both of you smiling because you finally told the truth?" he asked innocently. Adrian laughed softly, surprised by his son's observation. Naomi smiled through happy tears. Oliver reached for both of their hands and gently brought them together. "Families stay together," he said with complete certainty. Naomi looked at Adrian, seeing not a powerful ruler standing before her, but a devoted father whose greatest strength had become his willingness to love openly. She nodded with quiet confidence. "If you will have me," she said softly, "I would like to stay." Oliver wrapped his arms around both of them without hesitation. "Then we are all home now," he whispered. As the evening sunlight settled across the kingdom below, Adrian realized that no royal ceremony could have carried greater meaning than that simple embrace. The palace that once echoed with loneliness had become a place where kindness guided every decision, trust strengthened every relationship, and love was freely chosen each day. In that peaceful moment, the future of Blackwood Kingdom no longer rested only upon a crown. It rested within a family that had discovered the extraordinary strength of gentle hearts. Years passed quietly, and the story of Blackwood Palace became one of the most cherished memories carried throughout the kingdom. The halls that once felt distant and cold were now filled with warmth, laughter, and the sound of people who truly felt at home. Adrian Blackwood continued to lead as the Alpha King, but those who knew him understood that the greatest transformation had never been in the way he ruled. It was in the way he cared. The crown remained upon his head, yet his heart no longer carried the loneliness that had once followed him everywhere. Beside him stood Naomi Sinclair, the White Omega healer who arrived at the palace with nothing but kindness and a desire to help a lost child. Over time, she became more than a healer. She became the heart of a family, a trusted guide to the kingdom, and a reminder that gentleness could create changes no force ever could. Oliver Blackwood grew into a thoughtful young heir who carried both his father's determination and Naomi's compassion. From an early age, he understood that leadership was not about standing above others. It was about standing beside them. The lessons he learned beneath the old oak tree remained with him throughout his life. He remembered how Naomi taught him that every person carried a story worth hearing and that every heart deserved patience before judgment. As the years passed, The kingdom itself began to reflect those values. Healing houses were built throughout the land, welcoming anyone who needed support. Young healers were trained not only in magical abilities, but also in understanding, empathy, and responsibility. Adrian often told future leaders that a kingdom's true strength was never measured by its wealth or power, but by how it treated those who had the least to offer in return. One spring morning, Oliver returned to the ancient oak tree where his journey had begun. The tree had grown larger than anyone could have imagined, its branches spreading wide above the peaceful garden. He stood beneath it with a small smile, remembering the little boy who once believed he had lost everything. Naomi joined him, and for a moment they simply listened to the gentle wind moving through the leaves. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Oliver asked. Naomi smiled softly. "Sometimes. I thought I was looking for a place to belong," Oliver continued. "But I was really looking for people who would help me believe I already belonged." Naomi placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "That is something you have always deserved." Later that evening, Adrian joined them beneath the tree. The three of them looked toward the palace lights shining across the valley. It was the same palace that had once held silence and uncertainty, yet now it represented hope for countless people. Adrian looked at Naomi with gratitude that words could never fully express. "You changed everything," he said. Naomi shook her head with a peaceful smile. "We changed everything together." And that was the truth the kingdom remembered for generations. The lost heir was not saved by wealth, status, or royal power. He was saved because someone chose to stay when he needed kindness most. The Alpha King did not become stronger by carrying every burden alone. He became stronger when he allowed others to stand beside him. And the healer who entered the palace as a stranger discovered that sometimes the greatest healing happens when we open our hearts to become part of someone else's story. Long after their names became part of history, people continued sharing the lesson of Blackwood Kingdom. Love does not always arrive through grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a patient hand, a listening heart, and a simple promise that says, "You are not alone."